Hi guys, this is Joe Carswell at Colorado Construction Institute. We're here with another training toolkit session. We're going through power tools, and I've got Jason Wrights here from one of my instructors at CCI. He's going to talk to you about a very important tool. So Jason, what have you got for us?
Today we're going to talk about the compound miter saw, Joe. It is, like you said, one of the most important tools. We're going to talk about some of its uses, some of the parts, some safety. We're going to show you in the lab what it looks like to use this tool, and then hopefully you get to go out and practice using it.
So why would I want one of these on my job site?
Good question. Good place to start with, right? So the most important thing about the compound miter saw is that it's a portable tool. We can take it to any job site. Some tools are large shop tools that you can't really move around with you always. So the compound miter saw is something small that we can carry around, and in conjunction with that portability comes the accuracy of some of those shop tools. So we can make accurate square cuts or straight cuts. We can also make accurate angle cuts and repeat those cuts throughout the day.
Wow. So we've got a portable tool, we've got a productive tool, and we've got an accurate tool. I love it. Let's get started.
So we talked about some of the uses. I want to get you introduced to the miter saw, to the compound miter saw. So we're going to talk about the parts. So the first part is one of the largest safety features, or the most important safety features, and that's the movable blade guard. Housed behind the movable blade guard is your blade that does your cutting. It has to move freely, and we'll show you that more when we get into using the saw. But just know that this is your first line of defense for one of your first safety items with the compound miter saw. Next thing that we're going to look at is the trigger handle grip. This is where you hold on to the saw. So this is for one-handed operation, which is very beneficial. You can use your other hand freely to support or help hold the piece. The thing you need to know about the trigger handle grip, it's not your carry handle grip. So it's a lightweight plastic piece that houses the on-off switch, which we'll talk about. And so this is just for the operation of the saw. It is not a carry handle. So the saw is either open or closed, right? And you will move it open and closed. So it works off of a pivot on the back of the saw. And there is actually a mechanism called the pivot arm lock that allows you to lock the saw closed. You do this to move it around, as we talked about. It's a portable tool, so you move it around freely. You also might do this if you're leaving the site for a little bit to keep it in a safe manner, keep it out of harm's way. So this pivot arm lock is the way we will move it around. The thing you need to know about the pivot arm lock is that it's a little tricky to open sometimes. So for it to actually open the saw up to be able to use it, you have to pull down on that handle in the front and pull out on that pivot arm lock, and we'll show you this when we get out to the lab. The next item is your dust bag. This collects some of the sawdust, won't collect it all, but it is a way to keep some of that sawdust from flying all over. It'll fill up quickly, make sure you empty it. That's good care and concern when working with the compound miter saw. Some saws allow you to attach a vacuum to the back. This will even collect some more of the sawdust. It's a good attachment to have. Also backed by the dust bag is what we call a bevel adjustment. We're going to go into a lot of this, of what is a bevel cut, but I just want to kind of hint that on the back you'll see a dial. It allows you to slide this saw in a different form of an angle, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of what are these places that we're measuring the miter or the angles that we're cutting. So on the front of the saw, you'll see a bunch of numbers from 0 to 45, up to 50, 55, maybe even 65, depending on the saw you're using. These are the angles that you're going to cut in relation to the table. So at 0, you're cutting straight across the piece, or a 90-degree cut, right? And then you can move it either way on most saws to an angle that you might want to cut. Now these angles come in a variety of shapes and sizes. There's some that are kind of preset common angles that we're going to cut. So it might be a 10, a 15, a 22 and a half, maybe a 45. These are what we call indexed marks, right? These are common angles you can quickly set the saw to and cut. Then what happens if you want to cut an angle in between some of these index marks? Say you want to cut a 7-degree angle or a 12-degree angle. Well, your miter gauge, right, will have all those numbers. You set it to that angle. Then on the front of your saw, on this DeWalt saw, it's a black latch. It's called the miter latch. It locks that saw into place so that it won't slide. Then you can make a nice, safe cut. You see on the miter saw, on the DeWalt, there's also a little trigger underneath. that locks into those index marks. So sometimes you'll have to move the trigger handle and move that miter latch so you can get out of those index marks and then get to the site that you want, the angle maybe 42 degrees, and then push that miter latch down. Now let's kind of talk about the actual cutting parts that you're going to use on the miter saw. And so the first one is that horizontal surface that we're looking at, and that is the table, right? That miter angle's moved in relation to the table. It's flat just like your table. What's contained on the table? We see some safety markings, picture of your hands with a cross through them. It says don't put your hands within here. That's good to know. We also have a recessed cut part for where your blade's going to go through. Make sure you cut all the way through your piece, right? And so this is our table. This is our working surface. When trying to cut something, make sure that your piece is tight to the table. The next piece in the cutting area that we're going to be working with is the vertical piece. So we have the horizontal table. The vertical piece in the back is what's called the fence. We have other fences in construction. We talk about a fence on the speed square. We also have a fence on the table saw, right? It's something to align or index your piece off of. Cutting angles in relation to the fence are those bevel cuts. So in relation to the table, the angles are the miter cuts. In relation to the fence, it's a bevel cut. In order to cut accurately and properly, we need to make sure that our piece that we are cutting is tied up against the fence also. So those are two main parts where you're cutting, the fence and the table. So what are some other parts that we haven't talked about? Let's talk about how to move this around. We talked that it was a very portable tool to use, and that is the carry handle. Up on top, you'll find a structural handle that's actually built into the piece that when the pivot arm lock is down and it is in a closed position, makes for easy carry. It's a carry handle on top. A lot of saws also give you the option to carry it on the side. Make sure that your pivot lock is engaged before lifting. It's not the best to carry your saw when it's in the open fashion. Then what makes this saw kind of run? The on-off switch, right? So we have a different on-off switch for a variety of tools. Cordless drill has a certain kind of on-off switch, a variable speed trigger. And the miter saw has a different. It's a simple on and off. It's kind of like a light switch. You flick it on, there's power running to the motor, the blade's going to come up to speed. You let go of the switch, it's off. There is no variable speed when cutting with the miter saw. The thing you need to make sure is to pull that on-off switch, give the speed a second to kind of get up to full speed. You want to make sure you're full speed before you're cutting. So let's talk a little bit about how the cutting happens, right? We talked about blades, and we've discussed blades in other lessons. So I want to introduce you to a term that you might not know before today. That is the term of the kerf, K-E-R-F. The kerf is referring to that part that the blade is chipping out or coming through the piece of wood. So I like to use the example of butter. When you have butter and you have a butter knife, how do you cut it? Do you saw it? You can, but normally you kind of just press it through and it's separating those two layers, right? You don't end up with butter dust. But with a saw, we have what's called sawdust, right? So what's happening is that saw blade is going through and chiseling out or chopping out tiny little pieces of the wood, right? It's about an 1/8 inch thick. So why do we even talk about the kerf? Well, you gotta know the kerf if you're gonna cut accurately. So we have to remember when lining up our piece to always line up the kerf on the scrap side. Then you'll get an accurate cut time and time again. So are some of the parts. Let's get out into the lab, take a look at actually how we use this, how we set up the saw, some of the basic cuts we can make with it, and just kind of point out some of these parts and how they're actually used. So welcome to the lab. Got a compound miter saw right here. Gonna go through how to set it up, some of the benefits of setting it up with a cut station versus just on the ground as in this, as you see here. We're gonna make a few basic cuts, show you some of those safety concerns that we have, how to line up and get some accurate cuts. And that'll be it for today's lesson. So, compound miter saw, we talked about, it's a very portable tool. Carry handle right here up on top. I can pick this up pretty easily, right? I can move it around. So you'll see on some job sites that people will just leave them on the ground. Can you cut like this? Yes, of course you can. I prefer though to have something a little higher up at a work height. So we make what's called the miter saw cut station. It's a simple cut station with 2 sawhorses and a top table. So we're looking at the saw here, right? It's in its closed position. There's a variety of things that we have to do for this saw to be functional, right? First of all, it is a power tool. So we gotta find a power source for it. And I unwrap the cord. Keep the cord out of the way. I like to have it behind the cut station. And we'll plug it in, making sure it's plugged in and it is out of your way. I don't like to have the extension cord on this side. So the next thing we need to do is open up this saw. We talked about some of the parts of that. So I can push down on the trigger handle, and the pivot arm lock is right back here. This little silver arm, when we pull that out, can open it right up, right? So I'll show you that again. You can't just pull on this latch. It doesn't allow you to open it. So you got to push down a little bit, pull out on the latch, and it's set up. It's in the middle of the table. The other thing you need to think about is some of the support for the longer pieces we're going to cut. So I like to have these out feet supports. They line up with the height of the table. And we're pretty much set up and ready to go. So now that we have our saw set up, let's make a cut. So I'm going to start out with straight cuts. So in order to make a straight cut, I want to check a few things. First of all, I want to check that my blade guard moves, movable blade guard. The other thing I want to check is that my bevel adjustment is straight up and down, where it's 0. So I can check that. Then I need to check that my miter is at 0. It's locked into that 0 index mark. The saw is ready to make a straight cut. Let's kind of walk through what this might look like. I want to cut off a 4-inch piece. Mark at 4 inches. I like to use my speed square to draw a nice clean line. So this is my 4-inch piece. This is my scrap side. I personally put a little X on my scrap with rough lumber, just so I remember which side that I'm going to line that kerf up on. I'm going to go and I'm going to line up my blade on that scrap side. There's a few different ways you can line that up. You can look down here and see. Some saws also allow you to look through the blade guard to be able to line it up. Some saws have a laser on them that help you to line it up. As you can see, I don't have my hand on the trigger. I also don't have my hands in by the blade. I keep them out here. This piece is plenty long. So when I have it lined up, I secure it with my support hand, raise the saw up. I'm going to pull the on-off switch, let the saw come up to full speed, plunge through at a reasonable pace, let go of the trigger handle and lift up, and your piece is going to be cut. Let's take a look. When the saw blade stops moving, reach in, grab my piece. Should be able to measure this. And if I laid it out and cut it correctly, it should be right on 4 inches, which it is. So that was a good cut. So now I want to show you how to put away the saw, how to transport it again, right? It's kind of in reverse. So the first thing to do is find that dust bag, go and empty that in trash receptacle or wherever you're going to empty it. Clean up any sawdust that's attached to the saw. So get it as clean as you possibly can. Then we're going to work to put this saw away, right? So the first thing I like to do when I'm putting my saw away is unplug it. Then I like to close it and lock that pivot arm lock in. I like to keep my cord out of the way. So we'll wrap it up. And it varies on saws. Some saws have places where you can actually wrap the cord. I just like to keep it out of the way. And then I personally like to move it to an extreme angle, kind of centers everything over it. And then you're ready to take this saw and get it back out of the lab.
Thanks, Jason. That was a great session about the compound miter saw. I feel like we've now got the basics about the parts, the use, and the safety of this tool. So my question to you is, now that we know those things, what do we have to look forward to? What can we learn next?
Yeah, hopefully we got you a good foundation of where we're at with the compound miter saw, right? And you'll be able to apply that to some of the basic cuts you're going to make. In the future, we're going to learn some more advanced angle cuts or a variety of angle cuts. We're going to talk about some of those bevel cuts and using miter cuts and bevel cuts together, right, to get some of those compound angles. We're going to talk about some of the maintenance with this tool, and we're going to expose you to a variety of different compound miter saws. No two compound miter saws look the same across brands, so we're going to show you a few different ones of those, some of the similarities and some of the differences with each brand of saw that you're going to run into.
Good luck, guys. Happy building.